Yes, thank you very much.
You texted him?
Yeah, Elan did. Congressman Lawler and Congressman Gottheimer are on their way. They'll be here, but I think we should get the program going, and then when they come in, we'll just pause and they'll speak for a few minutes. We are waiting for Special Envoy IHRA Foreman to come, but in the meantime, we'll get started with our panel of Elan, Carr, Alyza Lewin, and Eric Fingerhut.
So good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. We're thrilled to have such a wonderful turnout. Please thank each of your members for their interest and support and for encouraging you to attend. I want to also especially thank, I'm Eric Fingerhut, I'm the President and CEO of the Jewish Federations of North America. I also had the privilege of serving in the House back in the 90s from Ohio, and my Congresswoman Chantel Brown's office is represented here today. I want to also, in addition to thanking Congressman Lawler and Gottheimer for helping us arrange this briefing today, I also want to acknowledge and thank the Gamunder Family Foundation and David Gamunder, who's here, who sponsored the briefing for us today and our lunch. So thank you for lunch. It's the Gamunder Foundation. And also want to thank all of our colleagues at the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law. We're, of course, going to hear from Alyza Lewin and our colleagues at the Combat Antisemitism Movement. A number of people are here who work with the Combat Antisemitism Movement, including Ari Lipnick, who's by the door. So thank you to our colleagues there who do this important work. Of course, the Jewish Federations of North America, we're proud to represent 146 Jewish communities across North America. Every Jewish community has a federation. Your members are in close touch, I know, with your local Jewish Federation, and we're proud to be the umbrella that organizes the work of all of our communities. I also want to acknowledge the CEO of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, William Daroff, who's here with us as well. So we want to jump right into it, and of course, the attacks on October 7th, the terror attack by Hamas on Israel has had not only the impact, I feel like I can't see you if I sit, I thought I'd try it, but I'll stand, has had the impacts that we all know in the Middle East, but it's also had a dramatic impact here at home, and especially with the rise of anti-Semitism that we've been experiencing in our communities. It, of course, has uniquely played out on college campuses and for students actually at all levels of education. We're seeing it in high schools and even younger. A recent survey found that nearly 3 out of 4 Jewish college students have experienced or witnessed anti-Semitism since the start of this academic school year. Students who returned from winter break were often greeted with the same kind of rhetoric and threats that we've been seeing on the news. The overall anti-Semitism across the United States has spiked more than 300% since October 7th. The result of all of this is an increased need to ensure that we are empowering both university officials and, of course, all the law enforcement officials and governmental officials in our country to be able to correctly identify anti-Semitic incidents and appropriately respond. With today's panel, we're going to focus on the importance of adopting the IHRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Association Alliance definition of anti-Semitism and why the legislation that has been introduced to make the IHRA definition the law of the land is so critical to addressing the rise of anti-Semitism that we've been experiencing. We have 2 of our 3 planned panelists who are here with us already, and we'll begin with them. To my immediate left is Alyza Lewin. Alyza is the president of the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law, which is a nonprofit organization established to advance the civil and human rights of the Jewish people and promote justice for all. The Brandeis Center conducts research, education, and legal advocacy to combat anti-Semitism on campus, trains students to understand their legal rights, and educates administrators on best practices to combat racism and anti-Semitism on campus. She's also co-founder and partner in Lewin & Lewin, where she specializes in litigation, mediation, and government relations. And everyone who's been working in this field knows that Alyza Lewin is really the preeminent legal expert on the questions that we're here to discuss today. And I'll finish the introductions and then introduce a member. Elan Carr is currently the CEO of the Israeli American Council and brings to this role his extensive experience as a senior U.S. diplomat, criminal prosecutor, military officer, and community leader. In 2019, he was appointed by President Trump to serve as the United States Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, directing U.S. policy and programs aimed at combating Jew hatred throughout the world. Elan held senior leadership positions in the Jewish world, including serving as the 71st International President of AEPI, Alpha Epsilon Pi, and he currently sits on the advisory board for the Combat Antisemitism Movement. So before we get to our panelists, Congressman, thank you for joining us. It's my great privilege to thank and introduce Congressman Mike Lawler and invite him to share a few words on his efforts to help stem the rising tide of anti-Semitism. Congressman Lawler has been a strong ally, supporter of the Jewish community. He recently introduced the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, which is the bill that embraces the IHRA definition and seeks to empower officials to respond to anti-Semitic threats. The congressman has a deep commitment to the Jewish community and has always been willing to reach across the aisle to maintain bipartisan support in this issue. And speaking on behalf of the Jewish Federations of North America, we're proud to support the bill and proud of our friendship and relationship together. Congressman, please.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me here today. When I went to Israel in November after the October 7th terrorist attack, we met with Prime Minister Netanyahu. And we started the meeting by watching a 21-minute unedited video of the raw footage of the terrorist attack on Israel on October 7th. And one of the things that stuck with me, in addition to the horrific and barbaric images of women, children, and babies being slaughtered, was a young Palestinian man calling his parents in Gaza and saying over and over and over, "Mom, Dad, I just killed 10 Jews with my bare hands." That level of hatred is taught. And if we are to combat the terrorist attacks, and if we are to combat anti-Semitism, it starts with education. Last year, I introduced 2 bills to deal with this, specifically on our college campuses and universities. The first was the Stop Anti-Semitism on College Campuses Act, in the aftermath of that CUNY law school graduation speech, which was oozing in anti-Semitism. And what the bill would do is it would strip any institution of higher learning of federal dollars, including student aid, for sanctioning or promoting anti-Semitic events on its campus. The second bill, which Elan and I have worked closely on, is the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, which would require the Department of Education to adopt the IHRA working definition and its contemporary examples for its discrimination enforcement actions. If we are to deal with it on our college campuses, they must be able to define it and enforce it. And I think what we saw during that hearing, in which 3 university presidents couldn't speak clearly and unequivocally that calling for the genocide of Jews does in fact violate their code of conduct and is in fact harassment. And there's no context needed nor action taken. The mere calling for it is enough of a violation to bring enforcement against. And that, to me, is part of the fundamental issue here. Secondarily, obviously, within the Middle East, we need to deal with this in a very systematic way. It's why I introduced, along with Congressman Richie Torres of the Bronx, the Special Envoy for the Abraham Accords Act. That bill is now law. We introduced it at the beginning of last year, passed it after I visited Israel for the 75th anniversary with Speaker McCarthy, passed it in the House and negotiated to get it into the NDAA. It passed in December and the President signed it into law. So there will now be a special envoy focused on normalizing relations between Arab-majority countries and Israel, which is critical if we're going to have long-term peace and prosperity in the Middle East. In addition, we passed the SHIP Act through the House, which would increase secondary sanctions on the purchasers of Iranian petroleum. Iran is the greatest state sponsor of terror. They continue to fund Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and other terrorist organizations, including those that just killed 3 U.S. service members this past weekend. Their funding comes from the illicit oil trade. $88 billion in just the last 3 years. These funds are absolutely being used to commit atrocities against Israel, against the United States, and against our allies. And it must stop. This bill passed the House in the aftermath of October 7th. The Senate has not moved it. Chuck Schumer needs to act. The bill needs to move. And the President needs to sign it into law so that we can implement secondary sanctions on the biggest purchaser of Iranian petroleum, China. The unholy alliance between China, Russia, and Iran is real. And we need to respond to it. And I think when you look at what is happening around the globe, we are in the most precarious position since the lead up to World War II. Thank you. It is a very vulnerable place right now in the world. It's a tinderbox. And so we need to be prepared to respond to what is happening. I just left an interview on MSNBC with Congressman Jared Moskowitz, a Democrat from Florida, who introduced the SHIP Act with me. And we said the administration needs to increase its response to these terrorist organizations, these proxies that Iran is funding. We need to support Israel in its effort to defend itself. We cannot undermine their ability to defend themselves. Not now and not in the future. And so this is critically important. It is a function of combating anti-Semitism here and around the globe through education. UNRWA should be defunded and disbanded. The fact that you had UNRWA employees engaged in the attacks on October 7th is everything that many of my colleagues and I were highlighting prior to the attacks of October 7th. What is being taught in these classrooms in Gaza and the West Bank is a problem. It is breeding this level of hatred that is at the root of why this terrorist attack occurred on October 7th. So all of this is interwoven. It needs to be dealt with in a very real way, both here in the United States and abroad. And it obviously starts with education. So I appreciate the work that you all are doing. Obviously, we continue to collaborate together to try and get the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act across the finish line. I'd like to see that move. It's in the Judiciary Committee right now. But all of this is important work, and we will continue to work at it. So thank you for having me stop by, and I hope we have a good discussion.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for hosting us here in the House.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for your leadership and bipartisan leadership on these critical issues. We're very grateful.
My pleasure. Thank you. Take care, everyone.
So I'm going to jump up and before, please, Congressman.
Well, I mean, I know if he was
Josh Gottheimer.
Perfect timing, Congressman.
I can hear Lawler speaking from outside.
You know, Elan Carr,
I don't know this guy. What's your name?
Alyza Lewin, Congresswoman. So before we go to the panel, we're privileged to be joined by Congressman Josh Gottheimer. We're all very familiar, Congressman, with your important work in calling out and condemning anti-Semitism, both from the right and from the left, and your strong support of Israel and certainly the Jewish community here in America. I know I speak on behalf of the Jewish federations in your home state of New Jersey and around the country that we have been so grateful for your leadership and proud to work together with you. Of course, as a strong supporter and the co-sponsor of the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, which we're here to discuss, the importance of the IHRA definition, you are also leading this charge to codify and to give the greater tools that are needed to be able to take action to protect our students and others against anti-Semitism. Please share a few thoughts with the group.
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you all spending time on this, and it's good that you heard from Mike, who is a phenomenal leader on these issues and a very good friend, and someone I've worked closely together with since he joined Congress. It was actually an upgrade for Congress when Mike came. And what's really important is that Democrats and Republicans stand together on this. This is not a partisan issue. Standing up to hate in any form is not a partisan issue. And I think that's the number one thing I focus on, is that you've got to make sure whoever the target of hate is, we say it's unacceptable. Right now, especially after October 7th, we know just how much worse it's gotten in our country, in the sense that we're just hearing it more directly, right? And I think the unfortunate reality is it wasn't like it was invented on October 7th. It existed before. And someone said to me the other day, wow, this is just awful. I can't believe the comments people are making in the press, their friends, on social media. And I said to them, well, in some ways, it's a good thing. I said, well, it's a good thing. I said, I don't know how Elan feels about this. He's from California. He's not a Jersey guy. But I feels about this. But I don't know you, Mike, but I kind of like to know who's after me, right? I like to know who the bad guys are. And I think that's what we've really seen since October 7th. Now, the question is, well, what do we do about it, right? And is there a way to stem it? And what's come out in this process is even more clearly what's going on in college campuses, even more clearly just how virulent anti-Semitism is online, and how things like TikTok, in my opinion, TikTok need to be shut down in the United States or sold. Why? Because if you actually look at the numbers of negative comments and posts and bots on TikTok versus other social media, the percentages are far greater on TikTok. Why? It's controlled by the government of China, who works closely with Iran and Russia, right? So we know a lot more now than we did a few months ago, but we have to take action there. And frankly, we're going to really have to do a lot more to educate starting at a younger age in our schools, both about the Holocaust, using the IHRA definition, on what that means, and which I give the ambassador a ton of credit. It came to me very early on about the IHRA definition and said, this is something you need to focus on, Josh. And then
You didn't need much convincing.
no, but the bottom line is your leadership is phenomenal.
Thank you.
And we're lucky to have you serve, and hopefully, if you want to serve in a Democratic administration, I'd love to have you. And we've got to do more in K-12. We've got to do more in college. We've got to make sure Holocaust education is not something that is just mentioned in school for 2 minutes and moved on. And we're going to need to do October 7th education, right? And the problem I worry about there is that the other side is shaping it before the truth is getting to it. And so I'm very concerned about that. Listen, this fight is going to be a fight that goes on every day. You should just know that you've got people who wake up every day worrying about this and thinking about this. Today, I woke up and went after UNRWA and called for the Secretary General of the UN to resign, and the head of UNRWA to resign. But listen, the Qataris need more pressure on making sure we get the hostages free. There's a lot of work to do, but in the core of it is making sure that we do not let disinformation about the Jewish people, about Israel, continue to be spread, and that we stand up to it. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you for hosting us here today. certainly welcome to stay and have lunch, and
Thanks.
we appreciate your support for
Thank
this work.
you so much. Thanks for having me.
So we're going to jump right into the meat of the legislative question. We've discussed and referenced the IHRA definition. So Ambassador Carr, tell us briefly, how does IHRA define anti-Semitism, and why has it become the gold standard for defining anti-Semitism with bipartisan support in the United States and around the world?
Well, thank you, Eric, for your leadership, and to JFNA and to CAM and to all of the organizations that put this together. It's deeply important, urgent time. And as you just heard from the members, these are truly urgent times. This is not an overstatement, not a hyperbole. The American Jews in the United States are afraid. Let's start with that. Afraid. Even before October 7th, a survey done by the Brandeis Center showed that over half of Jewish university students who are active in Jewish organizations feel the need to hide who they are on American campuses because they're afraid. That's before October 7th. And the fact that this orgy of death and blood against Jews in Israel would trigger anti-Semitism to become more expressive, more violent, tells you everything you need to know. I mean, one would have thought that a massacre like that would have caused anti-Semites to be more quiet or more. No, it triggered this wild displays of anti-Semitism across our country. So these are urgent times. The IHRA definition is a game changer. Why? Because in order to confront a threat, whatever the threat is, you have to understand the threat. And we have a definition that is well crafted, that has now been adopted by over, you ready for this? Over 1,200 entities across the world, including something like more than 35 countries, about 40 countries, I think, hundreds of local and municipal and provincial governments, including U.S. states, and hundreds of universities across the country, so across the world. So it's a global standard, and here's why it's so important. The IHRA definition, beyond simply saying, there's a kind of, anti-Semitism is hatred of Jews, which can be expressed, targeting Jews or Jewish community assets, or even non-Jews because of their positions. Okay, it's not rocket science. That's not a particularly shocking or revolutionary statement. But what is deeply important is that the IHRA definition includes 11 examples of anti-Semitism that are the typical examples of how Jew hatred manifests itself in our day and age. And those examples, and here's the importance of it, those examples capture not only, what is often thought of as the old kind of medieval Jew hatred, Jews responsible for all the bad that happens in the world, or exhibiting malevolent control over our institutions of our society, but it also captures what we're seeing now on full display, which is what's often called the new anti-Semitism, targeting Jewish peoplehood. The fact that Jews are an ethno-national group with rights of self-determination. So, one example, denying the Jewish people the right of self-determination, for example, by claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor. An example. Equating Israel to Nazi Germany. An example. Subjecting Israel to a double standard to which no other democracy is held. An example. And so that's really the power of the IHRA definition, is in the examples. It's all about the examples, because the examples give us a roadmap for understanding the many ugly heads of Jew hatred and how it manifests. Last point, very, very important to say. The IHRA definition is not about censorship. It's not about punishment. Whether it's new anti-Semitism or old anti-Semitism, if it's protected by the First Amendment, it's protected by the First Amendment. The IHRA definition says nothing about preventing, prohibiting, punishing expressions of speech. The IHRA definition is purely about defining Jew hatred. Now, what you do about it after you define it, well, that's subject to debate. It might be nothing more than a condemnation, which is very valuable, by the way. Condemnation of ugly, vile speech is exactly what the First Amendment contemplates, right? You meet terrible speech with good speech, right? That's the American spirit. And so IHRA is not, don't let anybody say, because sadly there are people who try to mislead on this and say the IHRA definition is a limitation on free speech. Nonsense. The IHRA definition is a tool of education. It's not a tool of censorship. It's a tool of education, and it is a game changer because it allows us, all of us, to have an understanding of this vile scourge that is the hatred of the Jewish people.
Thank you, Ambassador. So you raised the question of what do you do with it, and how does it, how can it help curb anti-Semitism? Obviously, Alyza, one of the places where we're most concerned is the college campus, and you've been deeply involved in issues under Title VI and working with the Office of Civil Rights and the Department of Education. So let's assume we have the IHRA definition, the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act passes, and then you get to go to work. How does this help you? How does it help the victims of anti-Semitism on college campuses and elsewhere?
Excellent. So I want to thank you. Also, I want to thank JFNA and CAM for including, and the Brandeis Center for including me in this program. So I want to get to that. I just want to add one piece to your initial terrific introduction, which is if you really want to understand IHRA, I find that one of the most useful things is to actually go back to the State Department's 2010 definition of anti-Semitism. It's available if you Google State Department definition of anti-Semitism. In 2010, during the Obama administration, was the very first time that the United States adopted a definition of anti-Semitism, and you can still see it. There's a link to it there. What I really like about it is, first of all, if you compare it side by side to IHRA, you'll see it is almost identical. The main difference is that the 2010 definition on the second page has a heading that says, what is anti-Semitism relative to Israel? Which is exactly the issue that we're all looking at and trying to understand now. And what you will see is, as Ambassador Carr explained, there's the definition is identical, and then there are the list of examples. The examples relative to Israel on the 2010 definition are actually broken out into three headings: demonize Israel, double standard for Israel, and delegitimize Israel. And then the examples explain what those are. Some of you may be familiar with those three. They're often referred to as the Natan Sharansky 3Ds. But it will help you understand exactly what kind of criticism of Israel crosses the line into anti-Semitism. And one of the things that's also very important to note is that at the very bottom of the 2010 definition, it says, criticism of Israel similar to that leveled against any other country cannot be regarded as anti-Semitic. In other words, this is not
and that line, by the way, is also
That's what I was just going to say.
Yeah.
So the point I was going to make is, this is not about shutting down criticism of Israel. Criticism of Israel, similar to that leveled against any other country, is not anti-Semitic. And in fact, not only is it included in IHRA, but what they did when they passed IHRA is they bumped it up from the bottom of the 2010 definition all the way up to almost the top to try and emphasize that this is not about silencing or shutting down criticism of Israel. So I urge you to go look at the 2010 definition. Now, in terms of the campus. So one of the reasons why it is so important for us to have a definition of anti-Semitism is so that university administrators can actually understand the anti-Semitism that is taking place on their campus, that they can recognize it, they can see it. So I'll give you an example. At SUNY, well, we'll come to SUNY New Orleans. Let's first start with the University of Vermont. At University of Vermont, there were students who were experiencing anti-Semitism on campus, and that anti-Semitism overwhelmingly took the form that is often referred to as anti-Zionist form of anti-Semitism. So what do I mean? There was, for example, a sexual assault survivor support group. It was the largest support group on campus, thousands of students. After the last military altercation with Gaza in 2021, this group posted that they were blocking Zionists. And when Jewish students reached out to try and engage, especially the Jewish survivors who were feeling suddenly completely at a loss, the response was, sorry, we do not talk to Zionists. There was a book club called the Revolutionary Socialist Union Book Club that required, it would advertise on the university's website, and it said in order to be a part of this book club, you had to pledge no to a whole long list of things, including racism and homophobia and Islamophobia, and you had to pledge no to anti-Semitism, but you also had to pledge no to Zionism in order to be a part of this book club. And then there was a teaching assistant who thrilled to bullying Zionists online. She even posted online about the serotonin rush she gets from bullying Zionists in the public domain. When there was somebody, they didn't know who had stolen an Israeli flag from outside a residence where Jewish students were living, and they hadn't identified the perpetrator, she posted on social media commending the person who stole it, referring to them as the Spider-Man of Burlington, anonymously doing good. And then she had a tweet where she asked this question. She said, "Is it unethical for me, a TA, to deny participation credit to Zionists? I think it would be good and funny. -5 points for going on Birthright in 2018, -10 points for posting a pic of yourself with a tank in the Golan Heights, and -2 points just because I hate your vibe in general." So the Brandeis Center filed a complaint with the Office for Civil Rights in the Department of Education, and the Department of Education issued a resolution agreement. That resolution agreement was issued last April, and it actually is still, when it comes to university campuses, is the only university campus anti-Semitism resolution agreement. There's another resolution agreement just issued the other day, but that's K through 12. This is the only anti-Semitism resolution agreement so far that has been issued by the current administration. And in it, what they did is they required the University of Vermont to address this kind of harassment and discrimination, to make sure that they were modifying, this is among other things, their anti-discrimination policies, their training, to address this, and they referred to it as a form of national origin discrimination on the basis of shared ancestry. Meaning national origin discrimination is no longer, reserved for only, you're born in that country, I can't discriminate against somebody born in Israel, they're Israeli. National origin discrimination now recognizes, as we were talking about, that the Jews are a people, and that as a people, we have a shared ancestral and ethnic heritage. What connects us as people, the Jewish people, is not just religious practice. There are many Jews who do not define their Jewish identity by religious practice. But as part of the Jewish people, they believe they have a shared history, right? The Jews were the people that were once slaves in Egypt and wandered for 40 years in the desert and reached the promised land. And in the promised land of Israel is where the Jews became a nation. And in fact, over half of the 613 commandments in the Bible actually relate to the life of the Jewish people as a nation in the land of Israel, right? You cannot separate the Jewish people and their history from the land of Israel. And what we're seeing today on campus is this harassment and discrimination of Jews who believe that the Jews are a people, and the Jews as a people have this right to self-determination in some borders in the land of Israel, right? And so what's happening now today on campus is it's not a question of what is your opinion on the policies of the government of Israel. People aren't stopping to ask that to students. They're just saying, if you believe Israel has a right to exist at all, if you're one of those Jews who celebrates that part of your ancestral or ethnic heritage, you're persona non grata. You are now not welcome. You're not welcome in our clubs, you're not welcome in our spaces, you're not welcome to advocate with us on behalf of any of those issues that students now feel passionately about, whether it's women's issues, LGBTQ issues, immigration issues, climate change, whatever it is. The Jewish students who believe in this right to self-determination, the right of Israel to exist, are shunned, marginalized. We've had now post-October 7th, we've seen students in class who are singled out by professors. We've seen students who, they'll be sitting there in the classroom and somebody will realize they're a Zionist, right? They support Israel to exist. They get up and move across the classroom and say, I will not sit next to a Zionist. We've had clubs that are excluding students. We've had student governments where students are being threatened with impeachment. Why? Solely because they're Zionist. And we now have assaults. Right? So it's
we
all
add
escalating.
We add the IHRA definition.
We add the IHRA definition, and that is how the universities are then able to recognize this form of harassment and discrimination as anti-Semitic harassment and discrimination, because it is targeting the Jewish people on this basis of their peoplehood, their connection to Israel, and they recognize the anti-Semitism relative to Israel for what it is. And they realize that they have to protect these students from that kind of shunning and marginalization, just like the Department of Education, right? The Department of Education, if not for the IHRA definition, would not have recognized this form of harassment and discrimination and marginalization and shunning as anti-Semitic harassment and discrimination.
Can I say something
Yeah, please.
as follow up? I think your point is so critical, Lisa. There's a famous Supreme Court opinion about pornography, and a Supreme Court justice says, well, I'm not sure how to define it, but I know it when I see it. The problem is when it comes to Jew hatred, they don't know it when they see it. That's the issue. Because when it comes to the new kind of Jew hatred targeting Jewish people, the Zionism, the Jewish state, suddenly there's confusion about it. And that's why the IHRA definition is so critical, because it allows us to define it, to recognize it, and therefore to condemn it, or if it rises to the level of discrimination, or also hate crimes, so it formulates the basis of a crime, to actually take action. And that is so deeply important. And we cannot be confused about, incidentally, Iran. You ask Ayatollah Khamenei, he'll say, well, we're not anti-Semitic, we're just anti-Israel. Yeah, but they hang Jews. They've hanged Jews in their country. And they say, no, it's all about Israel. But we have to see through this kind of nonsense. We can't say, oh, okay, that's fair. We'll back off. Can't do that. If it's clear Jew hatred, and Jews are being literally assaulted on the pretext of something in the Middle East, assaulted on our streets, we have to understand the connection, and we have to have a definition that allows us to explain why it is anti-Semitic to target Jewish peoplehood, to target Jewish national aspirations for self-determination.
So thank you both. I want to go, you each referenced in some way, especially you, Ambassador Carr, some criticisms that have been offered of the IHRA definition, particularly the accusation that it would stifle criticism of Israel, in some way affect free speech. You've both responded to that, and I appreciate that, and I'm sure if there's follow-up questions you can elaborate. One specific alternative has been proposed. It's called the nexus definition, and I imagine the congressional offices are hearing from advocates of the nexus definition as an alternative to the IHRA, or addition to the IHRA definition. So in addition to your comment about that you don't believe the criticism of the IHRA definition is valid, can either of you or both of you address directly the nexus definition, why we don't feel that this should be part of the legislation,
Sure.
nor should the legislation be watered down to include anything other than the IHRA definition. So,
Well, sure. I mean, 1,200 entities across the world, including governments, including U.S. states, including U.S. cities, have adopted the IHRA definition. That's the global gold standard for defining Jew hatred. There have been no entities in the mainstream that have adopted the nexus definition. And it's not only nexus. There are other definitions that are even worse, and I'll explain why nexus is bad. But the initial point is, when you've got a global standard, and then somebody comes and says, okay, well, I just wrote something up, here's something else. The primary reason for that is to undermine the global momentum of passing IHRA. Why would we do that? We've got a definition. It's very good. It works. It's a standard definition. It's been embraced. It's bipartisan. The Obama administration used it. The Trump administration used it. The Biden administration is using it. I mean, how much more accepted can you get? Why would we tinker? A. But B, the nexus definition is problematic. One of the examples of the problem is it says manifestations of hatred against Zionists is anti-Semitic when it leads to violence. Well, no, it's anti-Semitic even if it doesn't lead to violence. It might be illegal if it leads to violence, but whether or not it leads to violence, it still can be anti-Semitic. One of the most dangerous parts of nexus, and here it directly takes on and contradicts IHRA, is it says treating Israel differently than you would treat any other country in the world is not anti-Semitic. Well, double standards, according a double standard to a Jew or Jewish community or the Jewish state, is one of the absolute paragon ways that Jew hatred was expressed all throughout history. that you can say, okay, well, I'm ignoring behavior by other people, but oh, a Jew did it. Okay, this is outrageous, and I'm gonna castigate and blame and go after Jews because of this one thing. Meanwhile, we're ignoring, equivalent behavior by others. Double standards are always how hate and discrimination are expressed. Think about it with other ethnicities. Think about hate against our black community and double standards used there. And of course that's hate. Of course that's racism, right? And so for a definition of Jew hatred to go and say, oh, a double standard? Oh, no, that's not anti-Semitism. Well, what do you call a double standard against an ethnic group other than hatred against an ethnic group? Racism is what it is. And so IHRA is very clear about that. I think all of us are very clear about that. I don't think this is confusing in any way. Why would a definition come up and say, oh, by the way, you can treat Israel differently? The one Jewish state. You can treat the Jew among the countries unlike the way you treat any other country on the. What else would you call that, for goodness sake? And so the nexus definition is unfortunate, and that's why it hasn't been adopted by anybody that's mainstream, any mainstream group, organization, or certainly governments. And so why would we even talk about this thing? I mean, it's really, we've got a standard definition that works. It's about IHRA, it's all about IHRA. And again, IHRA doesn't censor. IHRA is about understanding and education and recognizing Jew hatred. And that's what we need to be doing.
Thank you, Ambassador. Lisa, you
I
want to add something?
want to add a practical ramification of using a definition such as nexus. So if you were to use the nexus definition, then the example I just gave of University of Vermont would not have been included or addressed because it didn't rise to the level of violence, right? You had students who were clearly being harassed, students who were clearly being excluded from clubs, but that would not have risen to the level of violence. Another example, which I started to, was at SUNY New Paltz. SUNY New Paltz, we also had another sexual assault survivor group that was actually created by a Jewish survivor. It was meant to try and give this survivor community a voice, not only provide support, but enable them to engage in advocacy. And this student, Cassie Blotner, who is a client of the Brandeis Centers, totally separately, having nothing whatsoever to do with this organization she created, happened to post and share a Chen Mazig Instagram post on her personal Instagram account. And Chen Mazig's post said, Jews are an ethnic group who come from Israel. This is proven by genealogical, historical, and archaeological evidence. Israel is not, quote, a colonial state, close quote, and Israelis aren't, quote, settlers. You cannot colonize the land your ancestors are from. So here she posted on her own Instagram account an Instagram post that basically expressed her belief and her understanding that the Jews as a people are indigenous to the land of Judea, that they come from Israel, that they have this connection to the land of Israel. The response from her co-chairs at this group that she had organized and created was swift. They immediately said, if this is your attitude, you are not welcome in the club that you helped create. You're out of here. They cut her off from the Google Drive. They cut her off from the social media accounts. They totally pushed her out. And then in a very public way, and what happened is also there was another Israeli student who saw this, who had been very active, one of the leaders in the organization, had spoken at their events. She shared the same post on her personal account in support. They cut her off also from the access, exiled the two of them from the club, and then proceeded to launch just vilify them, the two of them on social media. It got so bad with the anonymous threats, the yick-tack threats, disclosing their whereabouts, calling on people to try and come and spit on them and attack them wherever they may be, that the two of them had to leave campus. They could not even stay on campus anymore for the semester. Thankfully, it didn't actually get to violence. But the truth of the matter is, this would not, under a nexus definition, have been actionable because people were just saying some pretty intense, nasty things. But if it didn't actually rise to the level of violence, the nexus definition would not have applied and would not have seen this as actionable harassment. That's one of the real serious problems with utilizing or using the nexus definition.
Thank you both. Let me pause and ask if there are any questions that anyone here has for either of our panelists.
Just say the office that you're from when you ask your question.
Please, David.
I'm David Gottheimer. Stand up for a second. and we're one of the sponsors of this. I don't have a question per se about, let me take maybe 2 minutes if I can, just to explain why this is a problem. The big issue that most groups that are opposed to this definition have is that one of the examples equates anti-Zionism to anti-Semitism. There are a lot of different sorts of things. And that's a real problem. Why is this a problem? Because in today's culture, unless you're on the real alt-right or one of its cronies, being called an anti-Semite or defining yourself as an anti-Semite is pretty gauche. For the last 5-10 years or so, being an anti-Zionist, especially if you're familiar with intersectionality on campuses, has been sort of a badge of honor. The problem is that in a lot of cases, when you have people on campus who start critiquing on what they call anti-Zionism, it blends very quickly into anti-Semitism. And so, for example, and this comes from an article that I wrote a few years ago, there was a posting at San Diego State University. There's a social media post saying, SDSU divests so we can get rid of the Jews. At Berkeley, Zionists should be sent to the gas chambers. At UC Davis, after they passed a VDS amendment, they started putting swastikas on one of the local fraternity houses. And this is probably the most extreme one that I saw at UCLA, and it's only coincidence, these are all in California, this happens all over the place. One of the employees at the medical center said, and I'll just abbreviate this, her post was, Evelyn Jews, GTFOH with all your Zionist BS, crazy as Evelyn troglodyte, albino monsters of cultural devastation, Evelyn Jews, GTFOH with your whiny BS, did the Palestinians back their lands, go back to Poland or whatever freezer state you come from, and realize that faith does not constitute race. And the reason that I'm trying to mention this is because these two concepts are really blended. And nowadays, where anti-Zionism 30, 40 years ago might have been built on philosophical or political ideology, now it's really inseparable from anti-Semitism.
Yeah, I think, David, that's absolutely a great point. And I think it's important to remember that take 2 examples, okay? Israel has no right to exist, Jews have no right to a homeland, okay? That's kind of the anti-Zionist version. Let's take another version, which when I was in government, we saw all the time. Jews invented the coronavirus. This was all over the internet. Jews invented the coronavirus. Okay, an old-fashioned, more medieval form of anti-Semitism, right? Neither of those 2 things are prohibited by IHRA. They're captured by the examples, but they're not prohibited. So when groups go, and you'll hear this, groups will come and meet with you, and they'll say, oh, this is a violation of our First Amendment rights. No, it's not. You can criticize Israel, you can even attack Jews, and it's not prohibited by IHRA, but IHRA allows us to have a playbook where we can all say, well, this is anti-Semitism. The truth is that these groups who are claiming that their First Amendment rights are infringed on, they know the truth. That's not true. They know the truth. What really is going on here, they don't want to have a definition that allows us to say, well, what you're saying meets a definition of anti-Semitism. They don't want that. But guess what? The First Amendment protects you from censorship and punishment. It doesn't protect you from condemnation. And that's the healthy American debate that the First Amendment guarantees us, that we get to condemn. We get to say, what you said is bad, and here's why. And so the IHRA definition is not only is it not an infringement, it's the opposite. It opens the door to a real debate about why Jew hatred is a bad thing. And so thank God we have something on that.
I just want to add one.
Give Alyza the last word.
So I think it's very important for us the 2 examples I gave, both involved students who were shunned and excluded from a sexual assault survivor community on the basis of their Jewish and Israeli identities. And we have to think about that for a minute, because it is eerie how these 2 situations foreshadowed where we are today. The fact that people were unable to condemn that and recognize that as anti-Semitism, I would suggest directly led to the situation we have on October 7th, where you now have international groups that represent and claim to support victims and survivors of sexual assault who have refused to speak up and overwhelmingly remain silent in the face of the atrocities, the use of rape and sexual assault as a weapon on October 7th. Why? Because those victims were Jewish and Israeli victims. If we had recognized that and made sure that we called it out earlier and that our communities recognized that as anti-Semitism, we might not today be in the situation we are in, which is why it is so crucially important for us to have a definition that defines, as you said, it doesn't punish, it doesn't sanction, it labels. It is nothing more than a definition that labels what is anti-Semitism. And it is the people who don't want to be labeled as anti-Semites, who want to be able to engage in Jew hatred without being called anti-Semitic, who are the ones who are opposing the IHRA definition.
This is as good a summary as I've heard. Please, question, yes.
So I'm still in school, and on my college campus,
Where do you go?
The University of Georgia,
And you're representing which office today?
Senator Blackburn.
Thank you.
And on my college campus, I've heard people saying that now the Jews in Israel are the terrorists in their reaction to October 7th. And I'm always kind of unsure of how to kind of combat that and really stand up for the Jewish people. Do you all have any recommendations on how to combat that?
Yeah, well, just think of how outrageous that statement is. You know, again, nobody's talking about censorship, but my goodness, if there's anything we need to call out, you had 1,200 people butchered, murdered. Babies were put in ovens. People were beheaded. Women raped. Parents murdered in front of their children. Children murdered in front of their parents. I mean, if you're confused, not you, God forbid, but if one is confused about what that is, then they're not qualified to certainly to hold public office. And I think we need to call people out on that. The best way to combat it is to simply say, are you supporting that? I mean, really drill down on what they're saying are you supporting that? Do you think Jews ought to be butchered and killed? And if they say, well, this is a resistance movement. Well, what kind of resistance movement is that? Incidentally, you can have, there are plenty of videos of Hamas terrorists leading Palestinians into a ditch and shooting them because they wouldn't follow Hamas orders. Do they support these same people? Do they support that? Or suddenly they're like, oh no, with that I don't support. It's only when Jews are butchered. Then you know what to call them. I mean, it's very clear what that is. And again, we all have to understand how anti-Semitism manifests, and this is a prime example of it.
I would also add to that, every innocent life lost is tragic. There's no doubt. Hamas, however, has spent the last 18 years building tunnels underneath every single civilian neighborhood, under every hospital, every school, every mosque.
Right? And into Israel.
And into Israel. But there are, they're now going around this, if you can compare it, the Madrid metro is 295 kilometers long. The Barcelona metro, 170 kilometers. The London Underground, 402 kilometers. New York subway, 399 kilometers. I can keep going. The Hamas tunnels, they estimate now, are between 500 to 700 kilometers long. This terror organization has devoted all the funds and the resources, billions and billions and billions of dollars that were provided to try and help for humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza. Instead of using it to help them or to even build shelters to protect them, they built underground tunnels where those Hamas terrorists are now hiding out underground with the Israeli citizens that they captured and took hostage. This would end in an instant if Hamas would turn around, return the hostages, and lay down their arms. But they're not. They are insisting that they want to fight till when? They want to fight until Israel is destroyed, and their goal is the eradication of Israel and the murder of Jews. That's why, unfortunately, there are civilian deaths. But Israel has tried so hard with this urban combat to still try and protect. They take steps that go far above and beyond
And lose a lot of
what
soldiers.
any other, yes,
And lose a lot of soldiers
any other
because of it.
military in the world has done. But when you're dealing with this kind of underground tunnel terror network, what are you supposed to do? How are you supposed to destroy a tunnel that's underneath a civilian neighborhood without the buildings coming down?
And I'll just also say that any country and any government will take the necessary steps to protect its citizens from the kinds of attacks of October 7th. America surely did after 9/11 and would do again. And that's what the Israeli government is doing, is eradicating the threat that caused the October 7th terror. And until that's done, the war won't be over. Yes, please.
My name is Victoria. I'm from Congressman McGovern's office. I want to say thank you so much for coming to speak, and it's very disheartening to see the amount of anti-Semitism on campuses. I've seen many people lose leadership positions because they either won a birthright or because they have family members in Israel, which I think is ridiculous. They don't even have to say their political or Israeli affiliations. They are simply banned just because of their connections. I want to ask you to elaborate a little bit more on how you talked about how IHRA doesn't ban the speech about criticizing Israel as long as it's in the same lines as criticizing another nation. Could you talk more about that timeline?
Sure, and then Alyza can speak to it as well. So first of all, it doesn't ban any speech. So an important thing to remember that even if something clearly falls within the definitions of anti-Semitism and clearly can be defined under IHRA as anti-Semitic, it also isn't banned. So nothing is banned and nothing is outlawed, but it is defined as such. Now, the only kind of criticism of Israel that falls under an IHRA example is the application of a double standard to Israel to which no other democracy is held. Anything else, criticisms of Israel, again, I'm talking about criticisms, not calling them Nazis or whatever, but criticisms of things that Israel does, doesn't fall under any example and is explicitly excluded by a statement that says criticism of Israel as that which may be leveled against any other country cannot be considered as anti-Semitic. Alyza read that line. It's in the IHRA definition. It was moved actually to the top. You're correct, to the top, because it's very, very important. Criticizing Israel, just like criticizing America, doesn't mean you hate the country, right? So of course you can criticize Israel. But if it falls under one of the examples, that's a different story. And the only example really that covers criticism as opposed to really demonization of Israel or delegitimization of the existence of the Jewish state is the double standards issue. But double standards have always been, as I said before, one of the clearest paths to exhibiting racism or to punishing a particular ethnic group is to hold them to a double standard. To complain about them in ways that you don't complain about anyone else. And so, of course, that's an example of anti-Semitism. And so that's what I would say. It's very clear in the IHRA definition that regular criticism of Israeli policy is absolutely not covered.
For example, policies on settlements. For example,
anything.
policies on the types of criticisms that we typically hear are in the protected area.
Yeah,
Yes, please.
to add to that, I think one way to understand this is if you step back for a minute to try and understand how anti-Semitism works, right? Historically, anti-Semitism scapegoats the Jew. The Jew, that's the conspiracy theory. Whatever that society views as its misfortune, guess who's to blame? It's the Jew, and because it's a conspiracy theory, you can have directly contradictory allegations. The Jew can be the capitalist, the Jew can be the communist, the Jew, whatever it is. But the way anti-Semitism manifests is it tries to shun and push the Jew out of acceptable society, right? The yellow Star of David that the Nazis had the Jews wear, the idea was don't engage with those Jews. They're to be pushed out. Erwin Cutler, right, explained, and he's the most recent Special Envoy from Canada for combating anti-Semitism. But he put it beautifully when he said, the more traditional anti-Semitism sought to deny individual Jews their place in society. What we have now today that's a little different is we don't just have individual Jews scattered around throughout the world. We actually have a Jewish collective, the Jewish nation state of Israel. And what we see today is that That Jewish collective is now blamed for society's misfortunes, right? If you want to know who is which country is the worst offender when it comes to human rights violations, there are those who won't say Iran or North Korea, right? Or even Russia or China, right? They blame the Jewish state. But then what do they try and do? They try and push that Jewish state out of, as Erwin Cutler said, the society of nations, right? Only Israel is told it has no right to exist. So when you look at the definition of anti-Semitism, what you're seeing is when you take when Israel is treated as the collective Jew, it's not talking about the specific policies of the government of Israel, but it's demonizing Israel as a collective Jew. So that's where you have the 3 Ds, right? You're taking all those, the evil imagery of the Jew as the bloodthirsty, controlling, conniving, but instead of it being individual Jews, it's now Israel. That's not a criticism of Israel's policies. That's a criticism, that's a demonization of Israel as a collective Jew. If you're applying the double standard, right, that's another example. And then delegitimizing Israel would be suggesting that Israel has no right to exist at all. If you're going to be promoting self-determination for the Palestinians or suggesting everyone else has a right to self-determination but not the Jews, that's discriminatory and anti-Semitic.
A very relevant example of a double standard now is collateral damage. I served in Iraq and I'm an Army JAG officer. The laws of war expressly permit collateral damage if it's proportional to the military advantage gained. And there has never been a war, certainly since the laws of war have been passed and accepted, that where you don't have civilian casualties. It happens all the time. Now, they're awful and tragic, and we try our best to, the United States, we try our best to avoid them. Israel tries its best to avoid them. But it happens. If somebody blames one country in the world for causing civilian collateral damage in a military operation and no other country in the world, well, there you go. I mean, why only Israel? Why does no other country get blamed for civilian casualties? And despite clear evidence that Israel is endangering its soldiers to lower the risk to civilians who are not terrorists, right? So that's a perfect example. Well, why are you picking on Israel? If you're picking on the Jewish state and you're saying, well, your conduct is unacceptable because of X, and X obtains in every other situation when you have a conflict and combat, then that's a double standard and that falls within the examples. And that's very relevant to what's happening now.
So first of all, I want to thank both Alyza Lewin and Ambassador Elan Carr for their participation in this panel. I want to thank each and every one of you and the members that you serve in this Congress for taking the time to listen, to learn more. This panel today is the beginning of a 24-hour fly-in of leaders from over 65 communities representing different Jewish federations in each of your home communities who are coming to Capitol Hill to support the aid package to Israel, also to support the nonprofit security grant program, which many of you are familiar with, and finally to support the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, which embodies the IHRA definition. So over the course of the next 24 hours, your offices will be receiving visits from many leaders from across your districts and your states. And so to just say one quick word about the visits you should be expecting, I want to introduce my colleague, Karen Burrell, who's our Vice President for Legislative Affairs for the Jewish Federations of North America, who helped organize today's session. So thank you, Karen. And again, thank you both our panelists, and thank you all for joining us. And I see some extra sandwiches left over, so take them with you. Please, Karen.
Thank you so much. I also want to recognize Eli Byrne, who is our Senior Manager of Government Relations, and encourage everybody to be in touch with Eli. So like Eric mentioned, that we're doing this big fly-in tomorrow. We have 400 leaders coming. We have close to 200 meetings on the Hill tomorrow. And one of those 3 issues that we're advocating for, but the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, I just want to be clear that this is the official recognized definition of anti-Semitism by the Jewish Federations of North America, the Conference of Presidents of major Jewish organizations, the American Jewish Committee, ADL, World Jewish Congress. The entire mainstream Jewish organizational world supports this definition, and we're all mobilizing and all organizing all of our efforts to encourage Congress to recognize this definition and pass the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. So thank you all for being here, and if you need anything, you know where to find us. If not, we'll find a way to find you. Thank you so much.
where you live.
Thank you.
Terrific as always.
Tonight.
My pleasure, and
Oh, IHRA will be there tonight. He thought this was, here's what he wrote me.
Thank you.
May have been my fault. I thought the earlier part of the day was optional. The reason he asked me to participate was the 5 p.m. thing.
Thank you.
So he didn't.